Hey guys, what's up? It's Schla. Today I'm bringing you another episode of Car Rides with Schla. And this morning's episode was pretty miserable. I don't really know what's been going on with me, but I'm just not feeling the thing anymore. The show, the whole idea. I was very excited about it for a period of time, but now I'm not. I don't know, and it's kind of seeming difficult to keep my head straight about things, I suppose. I don't know how else to put it. But here we are. Of course, we're still doing it. We're still out here. Nothing too crazy is going on. Because what else do I have to do at this point? Not much. There's not many other. I don't know. I could not record, and then probably feel bad about that anyway. And this is what I was thinking. Life is a war. It's always going to be a war. And that's just the point I'm at right now, where it's a fight. It is an all-out fight right now between me realizing and actuating my destiny and just giving up. That's where we're at right now. So we'll have to see what happens. Now, some things to update y'all on. My Wi-Fi did not get disconnected. So unfortunately, it was kind of unnecessary to skip the gas. But it is what it is. We ended up, so we'll have to get gas tomorrow morning, but I probably should have gotten it this morning, but we'll have to try to be mindful and remember that I should really be getting in the car earlier tomorrow to compensate for the lost time. We're going to learn some very useful information, though, about how low my gas tank gets as a percentage, and kind of if I should be a little more mindful next time. Although I believe it will not be anything critically dangerous. Could be wrong, but I assume people push it a lot more than this, and we're just trying to figure out what's best for my car. Really, that's all we're trying to do. I ordered probably the last batch of things I really needed today, the Polarizer, which will hopefully reduce reflections, but honestly might not even do that. But we will see. It's all learning experience, all this stuff. And then additional car mounting stuff, because I want to be able to get a better angle. I can't really get the angle I want right now. So hopefully all that stuff comes this week, although I'm not sure if it will. Don't think there's much else on the agenda other than talking about my state of being, which is quite confusing. I don't really know how to feel right now. I'm learning though that I need to be patient. That's a huge thing. Learning to just go with the flow, no matter what happens. I think it's a good thing. I think it's important to still have emotion and feeling, but it's more important to be able to switch that. I envision a light switch where I go from my dramatic side to this cool, calm, and collected side that is not always present, but sometimes is present. Now, insight from the vacation. I did a challenge where I didn't bring my computer or anything like that, and it was interesting. So for a week, I had no computer, nothing. which is probably the first time in years even that because anytime I traveled, I always brought a laptop or two. I'm just that kind of person. I know it sounds goofy, but it's been years since I've been under a roof, so my house or staying somewhere, and had less than 2 laptops, let alone 1. Okay, so very big step for me. And ultimately, did I get anything out of that? I don't really know. I kind of hope I got something out of it, but I'm not sure. I was kind of hoping and looking for a more profound experience, and I don't really think I got that. Maybe that was the whole point, but it just seemed kind of silly. Although I guess I know that as much as I love computers, that there was never a point during the week where I was like, oh, I really wish I brought you know what I mean? So I guess it's a learning experience, because I was always so like firm about that whenever I would go places, to have all these things packed, all the computers and all my crazy. But no, I just brought one phone, and it worked out fine. So I didn't really blink or flinch or anything like that at all during there was never a point. I guess we can talk about a concept that I thought of during the vacation and that I noticed. When I was younger, and I think this is a concept that is subjectively true to me in my experiences, but at the same time, I think it's relatively true for a lot of people. And it's this idea that in the past, things were a little bit less optimized, right? Things kind of took longer. They took longer to load, obviously, with technology. I think that's a given. You had to wait for a lot of stuff. And so when I was a child, where we rented, we would spend a lot more time driving because we were not as close to a lot of the action where we stay at. And I think doing that and having to sit in the car so often as a child, there's so much memory in having to sit in a car and having to be in a car and just processing from moment to moment. I think it's very interesting. You have so much time to really process things when there is relatively longer car rides between everything, versus everything being relatively quick and everything just being in walking distance. You obviously have these moments as a kid where you get a certain toy and then you're anticipating opening it. I remember that a lot when I was a kid. Not even on vacation, but just when I was at home, getting some kind of special toy and wanting to open it in the car, not really ending up opening it in the car because my dad's always trying to instill in me patience and stuff. That was always a big thing. Anytime I got anything, being in the car, the minivan we had, there's so much memory with that. And I'm realizing as I got older, and kind of when I was in my recluse stage, not feeling like going out, just wanting to stay home on the computer, because obviously when you're on the computer, you don't have to drive. You get a lot more, how should I say this? It's convenient. You're getting more dopamine for sure. you're getting more dopamine. And that is the thing about modern life, is we do get more dopamine, we get faster gratification. But at what cost? We end up losing our presence in things. When we do things, it's lost. Things just don't really seem as consequential or exciting because we get everything so quickly. It's just there. Everything's kind of there. And in a lot of ways, reality can't even fully compete with what we get from a digital landscape. So vacation, and I know there's always the rose-tinted lens of being a child. In some ways, you're kind of more bored as a child, and then when you're older, things just move by faster. I know all that stuff, but I don't think that's the only factor. I notice people in general, and I'm a firm believer in this, right now, they seem very clouded. They seem kind of distant, disengaged. I think it's a general vibe I've noticed with most people. And I'm not sure why. Well, I have some ideas as to why. I think not only is it just the fact that there's more screen use, but it's the type of screen use, right? So a lot of people are engaging with short-form content, and even short-form adjacent. Or short-form, it's not short-form content, it's content that is adjacent to the effect that short-form content has. Now, I guess there always has been weird or wacky advertisements, but anytime I see an ad on a web page, it's always like some junk. Like it's just always junk and nonsense. It's never an advertisement for a product. I used to see that. I remember when I was younger and I would browse for gaming laptops a lot, the ads would come up as, a product I'm looking at. And that kind of makes sense. I think if a company's trying to sell something vaguely, that's pretty inoffensive to have as an ad. But I think it's a problem when an advertisement is stupid, clickbaity, intentionally misleading, or attention grabbing. I don't really know why that's allowed, I know why I was about to say I don't know why we got to this point, but I do. It's just about money, as usual. What else do you expect? But it shouldn't be allowed. There's just so much nonsense out there now. And I'm sure it was always somewhat the case. I guess these different platforms like Yahoo, and they'd always have a homepage and articles. And you guys get what I'm saying with like companies plastering a bunch of different clickbaity, misleading articles just to get extra hits. It's always been around, but it seems particularly worse now. It seems worse than it was to me. So I don't know. I guess I don't really know what to make of it. But back to what I was talking about. It's the perception of things. Now they go to this restaurant that we always go to at lunch instead of dinner because it's less crowded. But see, a lot of the memory and why it's so significant from when I was a kid is, again, the long car ride to get there, and also having to wait so long and being bored. It makes the experience so much more significant. Whereas when you go to a restaurant and you're immediately seated, it actually diminishes the vibe. It makes it not as significant, which is obviously a huge problem. I think that goes without being said. I don't know why. If you wonder why I said weird, I was about to say it goes without being saying, but that is not that is not the saying. There's no saying like that. So it goes without being said. But I don't know that people ever did really think about things in this way. I mean, I guess it's possible people knew, or maybe intuitively sort of knew, that waiting for things was better, but I've never heard people talk about it too much. And obviously, I'm a very time-centered person where I always think about time and perception. I've always been that way for some reason. I'm probably more time aware and number aware than anybody I've ever met or talked to. Now, there could be people who are smarter at math than me or faster at doing calculations. It's not what I mean. I mean like this constant nagging awareness of what time it is and what I have to do, numerical things. I had just have this incredible constant nagging awareness of. Isn't that something? It's useful, but it's also a bit overwhelming at times because a lot of people are able to tune things out pretty easily and still chill, whereas it's hard for me to pull that off sometimes. I have a hard time being able to just sit back and take it easy sometimes because I'm so hyper aware of all numbers and values of things, and you've probably gotten the gist of that when I've talked about how obsessively I drive my car very gradually, very gently, as to take care of it, increase its lifespan as long as possible. For my phone batteries, I try my best to keep it in the range of 30 to 70, but I try to keep it closer to 40 to 60 battery percentage. So my battery is being taken care of. I don't know why, but I just really value taking care of things. And those are things I don't know anybody else who does them or who would even want to. And I guess at times it's kind of a lot for me. And you can't always do it because things come up. You either forget to charge the phone or charge it too long. Although the worst actually just happened recently. I charged my phone to 85%. And I'm kind of confused because I have set in the settings to put an 80% charge limit. So I guess it just didn't work. I don't really understand that, but that's what I had it set to put the charge limit at 80% in it. Still charged up to 85, but I'd forgotten about it. And I think the lowest, it's not gone lower than 20s. Because I am pretty careful, but, is what it is. But I try pretty hard. But I like to. It's not necessarily something that drains me too much. For some reason, I'm able to handle it, and I get some kind of satisfaction or fulfillment out of it, I suppose. So that's kind of interesting. Obviously, it would just be a chore to a lot of people to do half of the stuff I do. Purposely wanting to use the manual mode in my car so I can reduce the number of shifts I have to pull off. It adds inconvenience, but I don't like not being in control of that because it's less optimal. So I've always had this perception of things, of time and how things get worn over time, and acutely noticing and being aware of that. Acutely. Now, the other thing about today is I have developed a headache, which is never fun. But I guess I'm not too surprised. Forgot to salt my food this week, so it tastes a little bit yucky. It doesn't really taste yucky, it's just the salt. Salt is so tasty. Without it, it just tastes alright. But it's always very frustrating when I forget stuff like that. So I'm going to have to keep that in mind with the salt. And probably add some or something when I eat. They do have salt at my work, so it's all good. I always get kind of nervous whenever I see police, but I never do anything that would warrant being pulled over, so I don't know. But when I see those lights, it's usually just somebody else. I think I've always been like that, though. I've always had a pretty stern acknowledgement and, I mean, maybe fear of authority. I've always liked authority, though. I've always wanted some kind of authority to look up to, but I don't know that I had any strict figures in my life at all, which is kind of a good thing. I probably would be very overwhelmed if I had a dad who was super strict or something like that. But my dad wasn't. He was very chill. And so was basically everybody. I don't know. Like most of my family, I think very laid back. Now, I always thought I wished I had structure, because I think it would have been helpful to me. But I'm not sure now, because now I try to think that the events that happened were meant to be, and that that's an important thing. I try not to think that, oh, well, things could have been better if they went this way or that way. I try not to think like that anymore. I don't think it's good. It might be incorrect, right? But I'm trying to think that way. I think we go through the things we go through for a reason. It's honestly kind of upsetting, I think, for a lot of people. And usually people who think that are people who have relatively good lives, which I would include myself in that, despite having a confusing life and a very stalled life, if that makes any sense. My life actually is good in the grand scheme of things. I think for someone who's 23, the executive function I have is nothing to not be grateful for. I am pretty bad when it comes to keeping my room clean, but we all have our issues. I have had a lot of issues with things when I was younger, but I think in the past year and past couple months especially, I've improved a lot. Although I think a lot of people do in their early 20s, right? I mean, I'm not trying to say I'm special. I'm just saying I've had this very slow, drawn-out life. But it's pretty common in the modern growing up landscape. I think a lot of people have that, you know? Not sure exactly where I was going with all that, so that's why I'm pausing. Is it weird that when I see bright headlights, a part of me wants to look at them? Is that weird? Because I feel like it is. Because I want to look away because they're bright, but then at the same time, I want to analyze the shape of them and all that kind of stuff. I think that is strange. I think most people look away, but I kind of just want to look at them. I don't know why. Maybe I just like light or something. I wonder what I was getting at with what I was saying. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not feeling as bad as I felt this morning, but I'm obviously feeling quite mellow. I was almost thinking I was going to come into this turn, but that obviously did not happen. And I'm still pretty mellow. I think it's going to take me a bit to get back into the swing of things, so give me a pass for this week. I got a pass this week, and then hopefully by the time next week rolls around, I have time to think about things and consider things, and we'll be in better shape. I found out today, which I was not super aware of this, but Mazda's CX70 and CX90, they only come in an inline six, and their all-wheel drive system is rear-wheel drive biased. And I think it's a very interesting and somewhat risky choice, especially with there probably being more pressure than ever for there to be electrical systems developed, and if anything, smaller, lower horsepower engines. So to have a brand seem to be making their dedicated style this rear-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive system that you can't, there's no alternative to that. That's just what you get. And then also an inline six. There's no alternative to that. It's just what you get. It's pretty interesting. And I don't have an interest in fast cars. I actually would prefer if they made slower cars, because I think I've talked about that. I think there should be horsepower limitation regulations. But I like the bigger engines because it's more interesting. I love cars, so I would want to have a 6 just to have it. But again, I honestly would like a smaller engine, but I think it's cool, the risk they're making, the emphasis on the rear wheel drive, and having that 6 cylinder as the only option. Now they do also have, I don't know about the CX90, but I assume they do. The CX90 and CX70 have a 4-cylinder, but it's coupled with a electric motor, and it actually gets more horsepower than the inline 6. So they do, but for the purposes of it, I think it's a very competitive, nice car. I think potentially in the future it would be a nice thing to have the CX70. Although I'm not planning on getting a new car anytime soon. But it's just kind of, I think, a very nice blend of something that performs really well, is in a very practical SUV format, still has all-wheel drive, so it'll do pretty good in the snow. But it's very performance-oriented, and the cost compared to similar cars is extremely low. And most importantly, since it's Mazda, the cost to repair is going to be so much lower than if you got a BMW or something like that. So I think it's very interesting, and I still want my Land Rover, of course. It's definitely something to consider because it would save a lot of money to go with Mazda. I'd save a lot of money. So when I am buying my Land Rover, I think it's at least worth a test drive to see if I like the Mazda more, because I might. It might be a better car, but like I said, I still think I'm going to go with my Rover, because that's just kind of my thing. I don't really know. But I'm saying I don't see a reason to not give the Mazda a chance, give it a test drive. I think it's a very competitive, interesting option. And the fact that as a brand, they're probably doing it to streamline cost as well. But sales could be higher if they offered us a 4-cylinder at a cheaper price point. I think I would pick that. I think a lot of people would. It's just very, very interesting to me to make the decision to sell something as an inline 6 just at the start. I think that's very intriguing. So I don't know. I don't like it because it's kind of the opposite of what I think should be done, but I guess they're making that gamble of, obviously people really like speed even though it doesn't make any sense, and so they're really just going for it, and that is super cool. So I think it's on the table. If I was going to have like a better car that is still reasonable in terms of price, I think a CX70 blacked out, or blacked out trim but still with the red paint, something like that. I wanted to see if they had a blue color, because I usually like Mazda's colors. Wanted to look into that. But yeah, so I think it's very cool. I also have noticed some Land Rover Discoveries and did some research on that, and essentially my intuition was pretty correct that Land Rover is a very unique brand, and so they essentially have an SUV with just a different style than their Range Rover, just to kind of have as an alternate. And a lot of brands don't do that, especially nowadays, because of cost cutting measures. It's just very costly to have a quote unquote alternate design. A lot of other brands have streamlined everything. So I think that's kind of cool that they still have it. But the actual practical reason is the Discovery is supposed to be more of a true SUV. I think its cargo space is a little bit better optimized, and it's supposed to be a little less visual, but I honestly think it looks pretty striking for that consensus that it's less visual. I don't know how much I agree with that, because it actually, if anything, I think it almost looks better designed than the Range Rover Sport, which I believe is what it's modeled after. The Range Rover Sport, like similar size body and stuff like that. And to me, the Discovery, I don't know, the Range Rover Sport never really looked that good to me. As much as size-wise, I would like the car more. The just full-sized Range Rover always looked way better to me. And I think the Discovery does too. The Discovery just has such an interesting look. And so I don't know if that's just me being weird. But it seems like, again, the perception is that it's this practical look or something. I don't really think that. I think it is just as designed, but just very distinctly different, but still very much Land Rover, even though it's distinctly different from the Range Rover. And I really like it. I really support that. And it's sad because my theory is that it will be on the chopping block. I don't think it's going to last. I think that it's going to eventually be discontinued due to some kind of silly cost-cutting stuff. So now I'm not entirely sure what I want, because that Discovery, I think it's a little bit more unique, and I obviously care a lot about that. I think their sales are lower, so there's less of the Discovery on the road than the Range Rover. And it's just all stuff to keep in mind, right? So I'm definitely also considering the Discovery. I like how it looks a lot. Again, in comparison to the Range Rover Sport, which I think looks significantly worse than the Range Rover. Now, that being said, though, I think this newest generation, I think, is the most comparative in terms of design and style. I do think the current Range Rover Sport is pretty good looking, whereas the previous ones I thought were just so much uglier than the full-blown Range, and it's kind of annoying because not everybody wants such a huge SUV. But I guess they have to make it look like a step down or sleeker or something, but I just don't like what they do to it usually. Anyways, time for TLDR with Schla. It was a pretty mellow episode today, but noticeably less sad than the beginning episode. And I talked a lot about memory, perception, time, and recollection, and then proceeded to talk about some cars, and some interesting cars at that. Mazda and Land Rover, I think some of the two most unique and distinct brands on the market right now. Anyways, hopefully tomorrow I will be more upbeat and won't have a headache. Bye, guys. Thanks for watching.